Welcome to the world of science function. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. The cold expanse of space stretched infinitely, dotted with the faint glimmers of distant stars. Humanity's last hope, the celestial ark, floated silently among the cosmic debris, a fortress of survival in a universe that had long since grown hostile. Within the ship's labyrinthine corridors, Lieutenant Adrian Kane adjusted his combat suit, the faint hum of his oxygen filters syncing with his quickening heartbeat. A holographic display flickered in front of him, casting a pale blue glow over his determined face. Behind him, Dr. Elise Rhea, the Ark's lead xenobiologist, muttered to herself as she worked to recalibrate a malfunctioning scanner. Elise was brilliant, though her eccentricities often left her colleagues scratching their heads. Her blonde hair, tied into a messy ponytail, bounced as she cursed under her breath, jabbing at the unresponsive device. "Adrian," Elise called, her voice tinged with frustration, "this scanner isn't detecting any life forms. Either we're completely alone out here, or this thing is a glorified paperweight." Adrian smirked, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "Maybe the universe finally decided to give us a break," he replied, slinging his plasma rifle over his shoulder. "But I wouldn't count on it." The situation wasn't exactly reassuring. Humanity had fled Earth generations ago, driven away by a cataclysm of their own making. They had found refuge aboard the Celestial Ark, a state-of-the-art vessel designed to explore the far reaches of the cosmos. But what had started as a quest for a new home had turned into an unending struggle for survival. Today was no different. "Captain's orders were clear," Adrian continued, his tone hardening. "We're to scout this derelict ship, recover anything useful, and get back to the Arkansas. No heroics." Elise rolled her eyes, still fiddling with the scanner. "And if we run into another one of those delightful alien death squads?" Adrian's smirk faded. The Vrexel, a race of biomechanical predators, had been humanity's nightmare for decades. They were relentless, and worse, they seemed to take a perverse pleasure in tormenting their prey. Adrian didn't need a reminder of what was at stake. The two approached the airlock of the derelict ship, its massive steel doors scorched and scarred. A low vibration echoed through the chamber, barely audible over the hiss of their pressurized suits. Adrian placed his hand on the control panel, initiating the override sequence. "Let's hope this isn't another death trap," he muttered. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with jagged scratches, as if something had clawed its way through. The faint smell of ozone and decay seeped into Adrian's helmet, making him grimace. "Well," Elise said, her voice laced with nervous humor, "this place has definitely seen better days." Adrian scanned the corridor with his rifle, the weapon's targeting reticle casting a faint red glow ahead. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft crunch of their boots on the metallic floor. As they moved deeper into the ship, the atmosphere grew more unsettling. Strange, pulsating growths clung to the walls, organic yet metallic, as if the ship itself had begun to merge with some alien entity. Elise crouched to examine one of the growths, her curiosity overcoming her caution. "This isn't natural," she whispered, running a gloved hand over the surface. The growth pulsed under her touch, emitting a faint, eerie light. "It's like the ship's alive." "Alive and hostile, most likely," Adrian replied, his grip tightening on his rifle. They reached what appeared to be the ship's command center, a large, circular room dominated by a central console. The screens flickered erratically, displaying incomprehensible symbols. Elise approached the console, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "If I can access the ship's logs, we might be able to figure out what happened here," she said, pulling a portable interface from her pack. As she worked, Adrian paced the room, his nerves on edge. Something about this place felt wrong, like they were being watched. He scanned the shadows, his rifle at the ready, but saw nothing. "Elise, how much longer?" he asked, his voice tense. "Almost there," she replied, her fingers flying over the interface. Before she could finish, a low, guttural growl echoed through the room. Adrian froze, his pulse racing. The sound wasn't human, or Vrexel, for that matter. "Elise," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've got company." The growl grew louder, reverberating through the walls. From the darkness emerged a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. It was massive, its body a grotesque fusion of flesh and machinery. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent red light, and its claws glistened with an oily sheen. Adrian raised his rifle, his instincts kicking in. "Get behind me," he shouted, firing a burst of plasma at the creature. The shots hit their mark, but the creature barely flinched. Elise scrambled to her feet, clutching her scanner. "That's not possible," she stammered. "No life form should be able to survive direct plasma fire." "Tell that to our friend here," Adrian retorted, dodging a swipe from the creature's massive claws. The two retreated down the corridor, the creature in pursuit. Its growls echoed like thunder, each step shaking the floor beneath them. Adrian fired another burst, aiming for the creature's legs, but it was relentless. "We can't outrun it," Elise gasped, her voice trembling. "Then we outsmart it," Adrian replied, his mind racing. He scanned the corridor ahead, spotting a cluster of explosive canisters. "Keep running," he shouted, turning to face the creature. As it lunged toward him, he fired a single, precise shot at the canisters. The resulting explosion rocked the ship, engulfing the creature in a fiery inferno. Adrian and Elise stumbled into the next chamber, their suits scorched but intact. The creature's roars faded behind them, replaced by the ominous groan of the ship's failing structure. "Well," Elise said, catching her breath, "that was horrifying." Adrian managed a grim smile. "Just another day in paradise." But as they regrouped, a new sound emerged, an otherworldly hum that seemed to resonate from the ship itself. Adrian and Elise exchanged a worried glance. Whatever they had just faced was only the beginning. Adrian adjusted the straps on his suit, his heart still pounding from their narrow escape. The ominous hum grew louder, reverberating through the ship's walls like a heartbeat. The explosion had shaken the derelict vessel to its core, but the creature they had faced was only one piece of the puzzle. Whatever was happening here, it was far from over. Elise tapped furiously at her portable interface, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm picking up strange energy readings," she said, her voice strained. "It's like the ship is regenerating itself." "Regenerating?" Adrian echoed, his rifle at the ready. "That's not exactly comforting." Elise pointed to a nearby terminal, its flickering screens now displaying what looked like an organic pulse. "This isn't just a derelict ship. It's alive, Adrian. And it's adapting." The words sent a chill down Adrian's spine. He had seen enough horrors in his time aboard the Celestial Ark to know that an enemy capable of adaptation was the deadliest kind. He tightened his grip on his rifle, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead. "We need to move," he said firmly. "Whatever this thing is, it's not going to let us leave without a fight." The two pressed on, the narrow corridors of the ship twisting and turning like the veins of a living organism. The pulsating growths on the walls seemed to writhe as they passed, their eerie light casting shifting shadows. Adrian's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but retreat wasn't an option. "Not yet." Elise suddenly stopped, her eyes widening as her scanner emitted a rapid series of beeps. "Adrian," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm detecting multiple life forms, and they're closing in on us." Adrian cursed under his breath. "How many?" "Too many," Elise replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Adrian could respond, the corridor ahead erupted in a flurry of movement. Dozens of smaller creatures, each a grotesque blend of flesh and machinery, skittered toward them on spindly legs. Their metallic jaws snapped open and closed, emitting high-pitched screeches that sent shivers down Adrian's spine. "Go!" he shouted, firing his rifle in controlled bursts. Plasma bolts tore through the creatures, but for every one that fell, two more took its place. Elise sprinted ahead, her scanner clutched tightly in one hand. "There's a maintenance hatch up ahead," she called over her shoulder. "It might lead us to the engine room." Adrian followed, his rifle blazing. The creatures were relentless, their screeches echoing like a cacophony of nightmares. He fired again, aiming for the cluster closest to Elise, buying her precious seconds to reach the hatch. Elise reached the hatch and yanked it open, the rusted metal groaning in protest. "Get in," she shouted, waving Adrian toward her. Adrian fired one last burst, then dove through the hatch. Elise slammed it shut behind him, sealing it with her portable interface. The screeches on the other side grew louder, the creatures clawing at the door with a frenzy that made Adrian's stomach turn. "That's not going to hold them for long," he said, his voice grim. Elise nodded, already scanning the cramped maintenance tunnel. "This way," she said, crawling forward. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for them to move single file. The hum of the ship grew louder, and Adrian could feel it vibrating through the walls. He glanced back, half expecting the creatures to burst through at any moment. "Any idea where we're going?" he asked, his tone edged with frustration. Elise didn't look back. "The engine room," she said. "If this ship is alive, then its engine might be the heart. And if we can destroy the heart, we kill the beast," Adrian finished. He didn't like their odds, but it was better than waiting to be torn apart. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with massive conduits that pulsed with a sickly green light. In the center of the room stood a towering structure that resembled a heart, its surface glistening with a mix of organic and mechanical components. The pulsating hum was deafening here, the air thick with a sense of malevolence. Elisa's eyes widened as she took in the sight. This is incredible," she whispered. "It's like the ship's entire ecosystem is centered around this." Adrian wasn't in the mood to marvel. "How do we destroy it?" he asked, his rifle trained on the structure. Elise hesitated, her mind racing. "If we overload the energy conduits, it should create a chain reaction," she said. "But we'll need to bypass the ship's adaptive defenses to do it." As if on cue, the walls of the chamber began to shift. The conduits twisted and writhed, forming tendrils that lashed out toward them. Adrian fired, his plasma bolts slicing through the nearest tendrils, but more took their place. "Work fast, Elise," he shouted, dodging a tendril that slammed into the ground where he had been standing. Elise dove toward a nearby console, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm rerouting the energy flow," she called out. "Keep them off me." Adrian didn't need to be told twice. The tendrils came at him in waves, their movements erratic and unpredictable. He fired relentlessly, his rifle overheating as he pushed it to its limits. His muscles burned, but he refused to give in. "Elise," he yelled, glancing over his shoulder. "How much longer?" "I'm almost there," she replied, her voice strained. "Just hold on." The tendrils were closing in, and Adrian's ammunition was running low. He reached for a grenade, pulling the pin and tossing it into the densest cluster of tendrils. The explosion bought them a few precious seconds, but it was clear they were running out of time. Finally, Elise let out a triumphant cry. "Got it," she shouted. "The conduits are overloading." The heart-like structure began to pulse erratically, its green glow intensifying. The tendrils writhed in agony, their movements becoming chaotic. Adrian grabbed Elisa's arm, pulling her toward the maintenance tunnel. "Time to go," he said, his voice urgent. They sprinted back through the tunnel, the ship shaking violently as the engine room began to collapse. The screeches of the creatures from before echoed faintly, but they were quickly drowned out by the sound of explosions. The two emerged into the main corridor, gasping for breath. Behind them, the ship's adaptive defenses were failing, its once terrifying hum now reduced to a desperate whimper. Elise turned to Adrian, her face pale but determined. "We're not out of this yet," she said. "Whatever's controlling this ship isn't going to let us go without a fight." Adrian nodded, his jaw set. "Then let's finish this." Adrian wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his breathing ragged as the ship groaned beneath their feet. The explosions from the overloading conduits had thrown the vessel into chaos, and it felt like the entire structure could collapse at any moment. Yet, amidst the crumbling corridors and flickering lights, the hum had returned, louder, more sinister, and unrelenting. Whatever intelligence controlled the ship wasn't dead. Not yet. Elise clutched her scanner, her hands trembling. Adrian, this isn't over. The energy readings are stabilizing again. It's like the ship is healing itself. Adrian's jaw tightened. He reloaded his rifle with one of his last remaining cartridges, the weight of their dire situation pressing heavily on his shoulders. If it's healing, then we didn't hit the real target. There's something deeper, something controlling all of this. Elise nodded, her eyes darting between the scanner and the pulsating walls around them. There's a central neural core, she said, her voice shaky but resolute. It's buried in the command center. If we can destroy it, we can sever whatever's controlling the ship. Adrian glanced down the darkened corridor ahead, his instincts screaming that this was a suicide mission. But turning back wasn't an option. Humanity's survival depended on them finishing what they started. Lead the way, he said, his voice firm. We end this. The two moved cautiously through the twisting corridors, the walls shifting and pulsating like the arteries of some monstrous organism. The eerie green glow from the growths had dimmed, replaced by a harsh red light that bathed everything in a foreboding hue. The ship seemed to be alive with rage, its groans and creaks echoing like the howls of a wounded beast. As they neared the command center, the air grew heavy, almost oppressive. Adrian's muscles ached with the effort of each step, and Elise stumbled more than once, her breathing labored. The corridor widened into a massive chamber, its centerpiece a towering structure of intricate, alien design. Tendrils of glowing energy spiraled around it, forming a shimmering cocoon that pulsed with malevolent light. That's it, Elise whispered, her voice barely audible. The neural core. Adrian took a step forward, his rifle raised, but before he could fire, the chamber erupted with movement. From the shadows emerged a horde of creatures, larger and more grotesque than any they had faced before. Their bodies were a horrifying fusion of flesh and machinery, their glowing red eyes fixed on the intruders with an unsettling intelligence. We've got company, Adrian muttered, his heart pounding. Elise's fingers flew over her scanner, her eyes wide with panic. They're not just guarding the core, she said. They're connected to it. They're extensions of the ship itself. Adrian fired the first shot, a bolt of plasma tearing through one of the creatures. But as it fell, two more emerged to take its place. The horde closed in, their guttural growls and screeches filling the chamber. Stay behind me. Adrian shouted, unleashing a volley of plasma fire. The creatures were relentless, their movements unnervingly coordinated. Adrian's rifle overheated, and he switched to his sidearm, his shots precise but desperate. Elise ducked behind a nearby console, her mind racing. I can disable their connection to the core, she called out. But I need time. Adrian gritted his teeth, his focus unwavering despite the overwhelming odds. Do it, he yelled, firing another burst. A creature lunged at him, its claws narrowly missing his face as he sidestepped and delivered a killing shot to its head. Elise worked frantically, her hands shaking as she interfaced with the console. The alien technology resisted her efforts, its systems shifting and adapting to block her every move. Sweat dripped down her face as she bypassed encryption after encryption, her determination unwavering. Almost there, she shouted, her voice strained. Adrian's ammunition was running low, and the horde showed no signs of slowing. He pulled a grenade from his belt, tossing it into the densest cluster of creatures. The explosion rocked the chamber, sending shrapnel and debris flying. But even as the smoke cleared, the creatures pressed on. Elise, we're running out of time. Adrian bellowed, his voice tinged with desperation. I've got it. Elise cried out triumphantly. She pressed a final command, and the energy tendrils around the core flickered and dimmed. The creatures faltered, their movements growing sluggish and disjointed. Adrian seized the opportunity, charging toward the core with a determination born of sheer survival. He reached for the explosive charge strapped to his belt, planting it at the base of the neural structure. The core pulsed violently, as if aware of its impending destruction. Detonation set. Adrian shouted, sprinting back toward Elise. We've got 60 seconds, move. The two bolted for the exit, the chamber collapsing around them as the ship's defenses went into overdrive. The walls writhed and buckled, chunks of debris crashing down as the core's death throes echoed like a thunderstorm. They reached the corridor just as the explosion ripped through the ship. The shockwave propelled them forward, slamming them into the wall. Adrian shielded Elise with his body, the heat and force of the blast searing through his suit. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the ship let out a final, guttural groan, its systems flickering and failing. The oppressive hum ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness. Adrian pulled himself to his feet, his body aching but intact. He helped Elise up, her face pale but determined. "Did we do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian nodded, his gaze fixed on the smoldering ruins of the command center. "Yeah," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We did it." But as they made their way back to the airlock, the ship shuddered once more. A new sound emerged, faint but unmistakable. A low, chilling laughter that seemed to emanate from the very walls around them. Elise froze, her eyes widening in terror. "Adrian, what was that?" Adrian didn't answer. He didn't have to. Deep down, he knew the fight wasn't over. Adrian and Elise stumbled through the crumbling corridors, their breaths ragged and bodies battered. The ship was dying, its once organic walls now brittle and cracking under the strain of the neural core's destruction. But that laughter, low, guttural, and impossibly malevolent, still echoed in their ears. It wasn't the sound of victory. It was the sound of something far worse. "Elise," Adrian said, his voice tight with urgency, "what are we dealing with? That core should have been the end of it." Elise's hands trembled as she checked her scanner, its screen flickering erratically. I don't know," she stammered. "The energy readings are still spiking, but they're not centralized anymore. It's like, whatever controlled the core has spread across the ship." Adrian cursed under his breath. "It's not a ship. It's a damn hive mind." The realization hit Elise like a cold wave. The neural core wasn't its brain, she whispered. It was just one part of it. We severed the connection, but now the entire ship is alive, and it's angry. The ship shuddered violently, throwing them off balance. From the walls, the pulsating growths began to glow a deep crimson, their rhythmic pulse syncing with the heavy thrum that filled the air. The laughter grew louder, reverberating through the corridors like a sinister symphony. "We need to get to the airlock," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "If this thing is going down, we're not going with it." Elise nodded, clutching her scanner as if it were a lifeline. They sprinted through the collapsing ship, the floor buckling beneath their feet. Every corner seemed alive with menace, the walls shifting and writhing as if trying to trap them. Adrian fired his rifle at a tendril that lashed out, the plasma bolt scorching the organic mass into ash. As they neared the airlock, a deafening roar echoed through the ship. A massive figure emerged from the shadows, towering over them. It was a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and machinery, its body pulsating with energy that crackled like lightning. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them with an intelligence that sent a chill down Adrian's spine. "You've got to be kidding me," Adrian muttered, raising his rifle. "Elise, get to the airlock. Now." Elise hesitated, her gaze fixed on the monstrous figure. "Adrian, you can't." "Go," he barked, cutting her off. "I'll hold it off." Elise's eyes filled with fear and desperation, but she knew there was no time to argue. She turned and ran, her heart pounding as she navigated the final stretch to the airlock. Behind her, she could hear the roar of the creature and the crack of Adrian's rifle as he engaged in a desperate fight for their survival. Adrian gritted his teeth, firing shot after shot at the creature. The plasma bolts tore into its body, but it barely flinched. The thing was relentless, its claws slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Adrian dodged and weaved, his movements fueled by sheer adrenaline. He had faced death before, but never like this. The creature lunged, and Adrian barely managed to dive out of the way. He rolled to his feet, grabbing a grenade from his belt. "Let's see how you like this," he growled, tossing the explosive at the creature's chest. The blast rocked the corridor, engulfing the creature in fire and smoke. For a moment, there was silence. Adrian's chest heaved as he watched the smoke clear, revealing the creature still standing. Its body was scorched, but its red eyes burned brighter than ever. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, backing away. At that moment, Elise's voice crackled through his comms. "Adrian. I've reached the airlock, but the ship is collapsing faster than I thought. You need to move, now." Adrian glanced at the creature, then at the corridor leading to the airlock. He had no choice. "On my way," he said, turning and sprinting down the corridor. The creature roared and gave chase, its massive form tearing through the collapsing walls. Adrian pushed himself to the limit, his legs burning as he closed the distance to the airlock. Elise stood by the control panel, her face a mix of relief and terror as she saw him approach. "Come on," she shouted, her hand hovering over the emergency seal. Adrian dove through the airlock just as the creature lunged. Elise slammed the controls, the heavy doors sliding shut with a thunderous clang. The creature's claws scraped against the reinforced metal, but it couldn't breach the seal. "Is it over?" Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian shook his head, his eyes fixed on the ship outside the airlock window. "Not yet." The celestial arc loomed in the distance, its lights flickering as it prepared to jump to safety. Adrian activated his comms. "This is Kane. We're clear, but the derelict ship is still active. Prepare to fire all weapons on my signal." The laughter returned, louder and more sinister than before. The derelict ship began to convulse, its structure collapsing in on itself. From its center, a massive energy surge erupted, forming a swirling vortex of light and shadow. "What the hell is that?" Elise whispered, her face pale. Adrian didn't answer. He knew instinctively that the ship was trying to escape, to survive and spread its malignant influence. He activated his comms again. "Fire. Now." The celestial arc unleashed a barrage of plasma cannons and railguns, the coordinated assault lighting up the void. The derelict ship was engulfed in explosions, its monstrous form disintegrating under the relentless onslaught. Adrian and Elise watched in silence as the ship's remains were consumed by the vortex, which collapsed in on itself with a deafening roar. The laughter ceased, replaced by an eerie, haunting silence. "It's over," Elise said, her voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. Adrian nodded, his body finally relaxing. "For now," he replied. "But if that thing was out here, there could be more." Elise glanced at him, her expression both somber and resolute. "Then we'll be ready." As the celestial arc jumped to safety, leaving the debris of the derelict ship behind, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Humanity had survived once again, but in the cold expanse of space, survival was never guaranteed.